My name is Clara Davenport. I'm 29 years old, and my wedding day was supposed to be the most joyous occasion of my life. Instead, right in the middle of our vows, my sister Isabella stood up and her voice cut through the air, screaming, "This entire wedding is a farce. You are marrying a waiter, Clara. How utterly pathetic." A deafening silence fell over the entire ballroom. All I wanted was for the ground to open up and swallow me whole. But then, my soon-to-be husband, Leo, gave my hand a reassuring squeeze and whispered, "Should we let them in on the secret?" I just shook my head. The real surprise would come a little later. Go ahead and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. And please don't forget to like and subscribe so you can hear exactly how my sister learned an unforgettable lesson about judging people by their cover. I grew up in one of Chicago's most exclusive suburbs, a place where your value was determined by the balance in your trust fund and the legacy of your family name. My father, Richard Davenport, was the CEO of a massive investment firm, a titan of industry who managed portfolios worth billions. Every single morning, he'd walk out of our sprawling, Georgian-style mansion in his perfectly tailored suit, briefcase in hand, a soldier heading off to another day of battle in the corporate trenches. He demanded nothing short of perfection from everyone in his orbit, and that pressure was most intense on his own family, especially his daughters. My mother, Catherine Davenport, was the quintessential society wife. Her entire existence seemed to revolve around a calendar packed with charity luncheons, gallery openings, and exclusive galas, where the city's upper crust would gather to see and be seen. She was the fiercely protective curator of our family's public image, meticulously managing every detail from the clothes we wore to the schools we attended. Everything, absolutely everything, had to adhere to the Davenport standard of excellence. And then there was my sister, Isabella. Just 2 years my junior at 27, Isabella had been the golden child from the moment she was born. With her flawless blonde hair, piercing green eyes, and an innate, almost predatory charisma, she was the perfect embodiment of everything our parents held dear. She was driven, calculating, and had a masterful understanding of how to navigate the complex social landscape we lived in. From her earliest years, our parents had showered her with praise and attention, creating a very clear, though unspoken, hierarchy within our home. Our relationship was, to put it mildly, complicated. When we were little girls, we'd share secrets and whisper dreams in the dark, just like any other sisters. But as we got older, the chasm between our personalities widened. Isabella began to carry herself with an air of superiority that drove a wedge between us. She started to measure people not by their character, but by their pedigree, their net worth, their connections, and what they could do for her. Anyone who failed to meet her impossibly high standards was immediately dismissed as unworthy of her time. Why are you even wasting your breath on people who can't afford a decent car? She once sneered at me after I'd invited some of my college friends over for a visit. You know what Dad always says about surrounding yourself with success? I was the outlier. Despite being raised in the lap of luxury, I always found myself drawn to a simpler, more authentic way of life. While Isabella eagerly pursued a career path that mirrored our father's, I chose to become an elementary school teacher. I found profound joy in helping a child discover the magic of reading, a satisfaction that no stock market victory could ever offer. My parents saw my career choice as a baffling, almost rebellious act. A teacher, Clara? With a Davenport education? My father had said, his disappointment palpable. It's a noble profession, I suppose, but it's hardly ambitious. The pressure to date, appropriately, was even more intense. My parents were constantly orchestrating dinner parties and social events with the sole, explicit purpose of introducing me to a parade of eligible bachelors from other wealthy families. These men were all carbon copies of each other, ambitious, status-obsessed, and to me, utterly uninteresting. They would drone on and on about their investment strategies and the specs of their new yachts, while my mind would drift back to the fantasy novel I was reading with my 5th grade class. The memory of my 16th birthday party still stings with a particular kind of shame. I had been dating a boy named Ethan, a kind, gentle soul from my high school, who worked part-time at the local library. When he arrived at my lavish birthday party, he was holding a thoughtfully wrapped book and a card he had written himself. Isabella took one look at his humble gift and publicly humiliated him. "Is that really all you could afford?" She'd laughed, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Clara, your standards are just shockingly low." Ethan never spoke to me again after that night, and a small, hard part of me turned against my sister for good. By the time I turned 24, I had reached my breaking point. I packed up my things, moved out of the family mansion, and found a small, modest apartment near the school where I taught. I made a point to refuse any and all financial help from my parents. It was the first time in my life that I felt genuinely free, even if my bank account was a fraction of what it used to be. "You'll come running back once you get a taste of how hard the real world is," my father had predicted with an air of certainty as I carried my boxes to my car. I never did. Instead, I slowly, deliberately built a life that I was truly proud of. My tiny apartment became my sanctuary, filled with secondhand books, thriving plants, and mismatched furniture that each told a story of a weekend flea market adventure. My colleagues at school became my real family, friends who valued me for my compassion and ideas, not for my last name. My relationship with my biological family grew more and more distant. Holiday gatherings became tense, awkward affairs where we'd trade hollow pleasantries and studiously avoid any topic of substance. Isabella would inevitably arrive, regaling our parents with tales of her latest promotion or a new luxury acquisition, and they would beam with pride. I would just sit there quietly, feeling more like a stranger than a daughter. "Still playing with children all day, Clara?" Isabella would often ask, a thinly veiled smirk on her face. "How sweet." I learned to let the comments slide off my back, but they still left small, stinging marks. Deep down, a part of me still yearned for my family to see me and accept me for who I was, not for who they wanted me to be. But as the years ticked by, I began to accept that this might never happen. So I poured all my energy into building my own happiness, completely unaware that a single chance encounter was about to change the entire trajectory of my life. It was a Friday evening in May when my world took a sharp, unexpected turn. After a particularly grueling week of parent-teacher conferences, my colleagues insisted we treat ourselves to dinner at Celeste, a notoriously upscale French restaurant in downtown Chicago. Under normal circumstances, I would have politely declined. The place was far outside my teacher's budget. But it was the end of the school year. We were all exhausted, and a little celebration felt deserved. The restaurant was exactly what you'd expect from a 5-star establishment. Dazzling crystal chandeliers, plush velvet armchairs, and an atmosphere thick with refined, almost intimidating elegance. We were shown to a corner table that offered a breathtaking view of the city's skyline, its lights glittering like a carpet of diamonds against the twilight. As I settled into my chair, feeling a bit out of place in my simple but elegant dress, a man appeared at our table. "Good evening, ladies. My name is Leo, and I'll be your server tonight." I looked up, and my breath caught in my throat. I was met with the warmest, kindest brown eyes I had ever seen. Leo was tall with broad shoulders, and he had a gentle, disarming smile that immediately put me at ease. There was a quiet confidence in his voice that felt like a breath of fresh air in this otherwise pretentious setting. When he handed me the menu, our fingers brushed for a fleeting moment, and I felt an unexpected jolt, a flutter in my chest that took me completely by surprise. "Is this your first time dining with us?" he asked. His gaze seemed to be focused entirely on me, even though he was addressing the whole table. "Yes," I managed to reply, suddenly aware of how dry my throat felt. "Do you have any recommendations?" What came next wasn't the standard, rehearsed speech about the specials of the day. Instead, Leo began to speak about each dish with a genuine passion, describing the ingredients and preparation as if he were telling a captivating story. He knew the specific region in Spain where the saffron for the bouillabaisse was sourced, the perfect wine to pair with the coq au vin, and he even offered tailored suggestions based on what he seemed to intuit about our personalities. "For you," he said, his eyes locking with mine, "I would recommend the duck confit with the blackberry reduction. It has a beautiful balance of savory richness and bright acidity. Something tells me you appreciate nuance." My colleagues exchanged subtle, knowing glances as I felt a blush creep up my neck. There was something about the way Leo spoke, the sharp intelligence that shone behind his eyes, that intrigued me more than any of the wealthy, self-important men my parents had tried to set me up with over the years. After that first evening, I found myself making excuses to return to Celeste far more often than my salary should have allowed. Sometimes I'd go with friends, but more often than not, I'd go alone, always making sure to request a table in Leo's section. Our interactions slowly evolved from professional courtesies into genuine, friendly conversations. I learned that he worked at the restaurant in the evenings while taking business courses during the day. He would ask thoughtful questions about my teaching, and he had an incredible memory, recalling small details about my students that I had mentioned weeks before. "How did little Tommy do on his science fair project?" he'd ask with a smile. Or, "Did you ever finish reading that fantasy novel you told me about?" After a month of these dinner visits, Leo finally asked the question I'd been secretly hoping for. "I hope this isn't too forward," he said as he cleared my table one night, "but would you like to get coffee with me sometime? When I'm not on the clock, of course." Our first date was nothing like I had anticipated. Instead of taking me to another expensive restaurant or a trendy cocktail bar, Leo invited me to a small independent art exhibition housed in a converted warehouse. The gallery showcased works from emerging local artists, and all the proceeds from sales went towards supporting art programs in underfunded public schools. "I thought this might be up your alley, given your passion for education," he explained as we wandered through the raw, creative space. What struck me most about that evening was the breadth of Leo's knowledge. He spoke about the different artistic techniques with an unexpected level of expertise, analyzing brushstrokes and color theory like he had a degree in fine arts. Later, when our conversation turned to the economic trends affecting education funding, he offered insights that revealed a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of financial systems. "How do you know so much about all this?" I finally asked, my curiosity getting the better of me. This waiter seemed to possess a depth of knowledge that seemed far beyond his profession. "I read a lot," he answered with a modest, charming smile, "and I listen. Well, you can learn so much about the world just by paying attention." As weeks turned into months, I found myself falling deeply and irrevocably in love with Leo. He was ambitious, yet incredibly humble. He was intelligent, but never condescending, and he treated every single person with the same level of respect, whether it was the restaurant's head chef or the parking attendant outside. He made me laugh with his witty, dry observations and consistently challenged my way of thinking with thoughtful, probing questions. And yet there were little mysteries about him that I couldn't quite figure out. Sometimes his phone would ring with a blocked number, and he would have to step away to take the call in private, returning with a slightly distracted, preoccupied look on his face. When I asked about his family, he gave vague, non-committal answers about growing up in a middle-class family in Chicago and his parents working in business. He never once invited me over to his apartment, always insisting on meeting at my place or at a public location. "I have the worst roommates imaginable," he'd joke whenever I brought it up. "Trust me, you don't want to see that disaster zone." These little oddities might have been red flags for someone else, but I trusted Leo completely. The connection between us felt so real, so genuine and deep. Unlike the men from my parents' world who tried to impress me with their status symbols and flashy wealth, Leo had won me over with his character, his kindness, and the way he looked at me, as if I were the most fascinating person he had ever met. "I love that you chose to be a teacher," he told me one evening as we walked along the river. "It takes a special kind of courage to follow your passion instead of just chasing money or status. No one in my entire life had ever validated my choices in that way. With Leo, I felt seen for who I truly was, not who someone else wanted me to be. I had found something incredibly rare and precious, a man who, like me, valued substance over surface, or so I believed at the time. Little did I know Leo had secrets of his own, secrets that would eventually turn my entire world upside down. After 6 months of dating, Leo and I had settled into a comfortable, loving rhythm. Our weekends were spent exploring the hidden gems of Chicago, cooking elaborate meals together in my tiny kitchen, and getting lost in deep conversations that often lasted until the sun came up. I was happier than I had ever been in my entire life. But there was one dark cloud that still hung over our relationship. He still hadn't met my family. I had been putting off the introduction for as long as possible, knowing full well how judgmental and cruel they could be. But as our relationship deepened and grew more serious, I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. One Sunday morning, as we were lounging in bed and planning our day, I finally broached the subject. "I think it's time for you to meet my parents and Isabella," I said, my voice laced with hesitation as I traced patterns on his chest with my finger. "Just be prepared. They can be a lot." Leo just kissed the top of my head. "I can handle difficult people, Clara. I serve them dinner every single night, remember? If only it were that simple." In the days leading up to the dinner, I did my best to prepare Leo for the firing squad that awaited him. I warned him about my father's intense, interrogation-style questioning, my mother's passive-aggressive compliments, and Isabella's razor-sharp cutting remarks. I even tried to coach him on how to answer their inevitable questions about his career and his background. "Just be yourself," he said, armed with that unshakable calm and confidence that I loved so much. "If they can't see how happy we are together, then that's their loss, not ours." The evening of the dinner finally arrived, and I felt a wave of nausea as we pulled up to my parents' mansion in my beat-up old Honda. The contrast between my humble car and the fleet of luxury vehicles, the Porsches, the Bentleys, the Mercedes, that lined the circular driveway, could not have been more stark. "Impressive," Leo whispered, his eyes taking in the massive columned entrance and the perfectly manicured gardens. "A little different from your place." "This isn't me," I replied, squeezing his hand tightly. "Remember that." My mother greeted us at the door, her smile perfectly polite but not quite reaching her eyes as she gave Leo a thorough, head-to-toe assessment. For what was supposed to be a casual family dinner, she was dressed in a designer cocktail dress and a string of pearls. "Clara, darling," she said, air-kissing both of my cheeks, "and you must be Leo. We've heard so little about you." The dining room was as intimidating as I remembered, with its massive crystal chandelier, antique furniture, and a long table set with the fine china that was reserved only for the most important guests. My father stood at the head of the table, a glass of whiskey in his hand, while Isabella lounged in a chair, lazily scrolling through her phone. "So, Leo," my father began as soon as we were seated and the first course had been served, "Clara tells us you work at Celeste. What is your position there?" "Sommelier." "Manager?" Leo carefully placed his napkin on his lap. "I'm a server, sir. I've been working there for about 3 years now. The silence that followed was so thick, you could cut it with a knife." My mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth. My father's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Isabella didn't even bother to hide her condescending smirk. "A server," my father repeated the word slowly, as if it tasted foul in his mouth. "And is that a temporary situation while you pursue other, more long-term goals?" "I enjoy my work," Leo replied, his voice calm and steady. "It allows me to interact with interesting people and learn about the different facets of the hospitality industry." What followed was a brutal, uncomfortable interrogation thinly disguised as dinner conversation. My father grilled him about his education, some college focused on business courses, his family background, middle class from the Chicago area, and his 5-year plan, continuing to grow and learn in my current industry. With every single one of Leo's polite, humble answers, I could see my parents' disapproval hardening. They kept exchanging glances across the table, the kind of looks I had seen 1,000 times before when they encountered someone they deemed to be beneath them. Isabella, who had been unusually quiet, finally decided to speak up during dessert. "Well, I think it's just wonderful," she said, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that immediately put me on high alert. "My sister has finally found someone on her level." Not everyone is meant for greatness, after all. "Isabella," I warned, my voice low as I felt my cheeks burn with a hot flash of anger. She completely ignored me and continued, "I mean, Clara chose to become a teacher when she could have joined Dad's firm, so it makes perfect sense that she would date a waiter instead of someone a little more ambitious." Leo placed his hand over mine under the table, a silent, comforting gesture of support. "I find that ambition comes in many forms," he replied, his tone perfectly even. "Clara's commitment to shaping young minds is one of the most ambitious and admirable pursuits I can imagine. It takes real courage to choose fulfillment over status." My father cleared his throat loudly. "Yes, well, we had always hoped Clara would eventually come to her senses about her career choices. Perhaps with the right kind of influence?" "I think Clara's sensibilities are just fine," Leo interjected, his politeness barely masking the clear displeasure in his voice. "She knows what brings her joy, and she pursues it with authenticity." That's something to be admired, not fixed. After an excruciating 2 hours, the dinner finally concluded. As we were getting ready to leave, my mother pulled me aside in the grand hallway while Leo went to retrieve our coats. "Darling, I know you think you're happy, but you need to be realistic," she whispered urgently. "What kind of a future can you possibly have with someone who serves food for a living? Your father could introduce you to James Sullivan's son next week. He just made partner at his law firm." Before I could even think of a response, my father joined us. "Clara, you are a Davenport. You can do so much better than this. Think about what you are throwing away." Isabella sauntered over, adding her own unwanted 2 cents. "Well, on the bright side, at least we'll get discounted meals at Celeste now." "That's something, right?" She laughed at her own cruel joke. I had reached my limit. "Leo is kind, intelligent, and he treats me with a respect that is more than I can say for how any of you have treated me tonight. He may be a server, but he has more class in his little finger than this entire room combined." I grabbed Leo's hand and stormed out of the house, fighting back tears until we were safely inside my car. Once inside, I completely broke down, apologizing profusely for my family's despicable behavior. Leo simply pulled me into his arms and held me. "Hey, it's okay. Their opinion of me doesn't matter. Only yours does." "They were so horrible to you," I sobbed into his shirt. "They're afraid," he said thoughtfully, his voice calm. "People who measure their own worth by status and money are often terrified of losing those things. It makes them judge other people very harshly." I pulled back to look at him, amazed by his composure and insight. "You're not angry?" He smiled, gently wiping a tear from my cheek. "Why would I be angry about someone else's limitations? I know who I am, Clara, and more importantly, I know who you are. That's all that matters to me." In that moment, sitting in my old beat-up car outside my parents' opulent mansion, I fell even more deeply in love with Leo. He had faced the absolute worst of my family's judgment and emerged with his dignity completely intact. What I didn't realize then was that Leo had reasons far beyond mere emotional maturity for his calm, unfazed response to my family's prejudice. A year into our relationship, Leo and I had built a life together that felt like home. The disastrous dinner with my family had, ironically, only strengthened our bond. While I maintained only minimal polite contact with my parents and Isabella, Leo and I were happier than we had ever been. On a crisp autumn Sunday, Leo suggested we take a walk through the Chicago Botanic Garden. It was a perfect October day, with golden leaves crunching under our feet and the late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the trees. We paused to watch the ducks gliding across the pond, and I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling a profound sense of peace. "Let's walk over to the Willow Grove," he suggested, taking my hand. "I've heard it's beautiful this time of year." The secluded spot under the weeping willows was indeed breathtaking. The cascading branches created a private natural sanctuary, shielding us from the rest of the world. Suddenly, Leo seemed uncharacteristically nervous. He kept fidgeting with something in his pocket and cleared his throat several times. "Clara," he finally said, turning to face me, "this past year with you has shown me what true happiness feels like. You loved me when you thought I had nothing to offer but myself." Before I could respond, he dropped down to one knee and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it, and inside was a stunning diamond ring that caught the sunlight, sending brilliant prisms of color dancing all around us. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Tears sprang to my eyes as I nodded, too overcome to speak. When he slipped the ring onto my finger, I gasped at its sheer beauty. The center diamond was far larger than anything I would have ever expected, surrounded by a halo of smaller stones in an intricate, vintage-style setting. "Leo, this must have cost a fortune," I whispered once I finally found my voice. "How did you possibly afford this on a server's salary?" He kissed me softly. "I've been saving for a very long time." Some things are worth every single penny. It was the first of many moments that began to make me wonder if there was more to Leo than he had let on. The ring was easily worth several months of his salary, if not more, but I was too blissfully happy to dwell on it, choosing instead to bask in the joy of our engagement. When I called my parents to share the news, their reaction was predictably negative. My mother gasped in what sounded like genuine horror, while my father demanded that I come to my senses. "Clara, you cannot possibly be serious," my mother said, her voice tight with disapproval. "Marrying a waiter. What on earth will we tell our friends?" "Tell them your daughter is marrying a man who makes her incredibly happy," I replied firmly. "Or tell them nothing at all. I don't need your approval." Isabella's reaction was even worse. She called me directly, something she rarely did. "Are you pregnant?" she asked bluntly, because that is the only logical reason I can imagine for this rushed engagement to someone so far beneath you. He is not beneath me, Isabella. "And no, I'm not pregnant. I'm in love." She scoffed. "Love doesn't pay the bills, Clara." "Wake up. He probably just wants access to the Davenport money. Leo has never once asked me for a dime. He doesn't even let me pay when we go out. Of course not. He's playing the long game. Men like him always do." I hung up on her, but her venomous words had planted a tiny seed of doubt. Not about Leo's character, but about his financial situation. How was he able to afford our frequent dates at nice restaurants, the stunning engagement ring, and his general lifestyle on a server's income? The questions multiplied as we began to plan our wedding. When I suggested a simple, intimate ceremony at a local botanical garden, Leo surprised me by proposing the Grandview, one of Chicago's most luxurious and expensive hotels. "It's far too expensive," I protested. "We can't possibly afford that." "Let me worry about the cost," he said with a mysterious smile. "I have connections." Those connections became increasingly apparent as our wedding plans moved forward. When we visited the Grandview to discuss the arrangements, the hotel's general manager greeted Leo like an old, dear friend, immediately offering us complimentary champagne and their most exclusive wedding package at a significant discount. "Mr. Vance, it's always a pleasure," the manager said, shaking Leo's hand warmly. "We will ensure your special day exceeds every expectation." In the car on the way home, I asked Leo how he knew the manager so well. "I've served a lot of important clients at Celeste," he explained vaguely. "Some of them work in the hospitality industry. You'd be surprised how many doors can open for you when you provide excellent service." I accepted his explanation, but other strange incidents continued to puzzle me. Leo would occasionally have to disappear for staff meetings that lasted for hours. One afternoon, while waiting for him outside Celeste after his shift, I spotted him in a deep, animated conversation with David Sterling, the renowned CEO of one of the largest hotel chains in New England. They weren't talking like a server and a customer. They were talking like equals, with animated gestures and shared laughter. When I mentioned seeing him with Sterling, Leo just shrugged it off. "He's a regular at the restaurant. A really nice guy, actually. He actually listens when the servers make suggestions." Even stranger was Isabella's frustrated report after she had hired a private investigator to dig into Leo's background. Yes, my sister had actually gone that far. The investigator found absolutely nothing suspicious, she complained to me during one of our rare, strained phone calls. "Just a squeaky clean record, some college courses, and a standard employment history. It's almost too perfect, like someone deliberately crafted his background to be boring. Or maybe," I suggested, "he's just a good person with nothing to hide." Though I was secretly relieved that the investigation had turned up empty. Despite the nagging questions that lingered in the back of my mind, my trust in Leo never truly wavered. I had seen his character, his kindness, and his integrity shine through in countless small, unguarded moments that simply couldn't be faked. If he was keeping secrets, I believed they weren't malicious ones. As our wedding day grew closer, the mysteries surrounding Leo faded into the background. I was marrying the man I loved, regardless of what my family thought or what secrets he might be keeping. Little did I know that all would be revealed in the most dramatic way imaginable, with my own sister serving as the unwitting catalyst. The morning of my wedding dawned bright and clear, with a brilliant blue sky and golden sunshine streaming through the windows of my suite at the Grandview. It should have been a perfect, joyful start to the most important day of my life, but a knot of anxiety was churning in my stomach as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. There were no messages from my parents confirming they would attend. No last-minute words of encouragement from Isabella, just a heavy silence that spoke volumes. My maid of honor, Sophie, my closest friend and a fellow teacher, bustled around the room, organizing my makeup, my veil, and the traditional something borrowed, something blue. "Stop checking your phone," she chided gently, taking it from my hands. "Today is about you and Leo, not about who decides to show up." She was right, of course. I took a deep breath and allowed myself to be swept up in the whirlwind of preparations. The makeup artist and hairstylist arrived, and gradually the anxious woman in the mirror began to transform, looking less like a nervous wreck and more like the confident, happy woman Leo had fallen in love with. My wedding dress was far simpler than anything my mother would have chosen for me. It wasn't an extravagant ball gown with a 10-foot train. Instead, I had selected an elegant A-line dress with a delicate lace overlay and subtle beading that caught the light beautifully whenever I moved. It felt like me, not like the Davenport heiress my family wanted me to be. When we arrived at the grand ballroom for the ceremony, I gasped in shock. The space had been completely transformed, far beyond my wildest dreams. Cascading white orchids and blush pink roses created the illusion of an enchanted indoor garden, and the massive crystal chandeliers had been dimmed to cast a soft, romantic glow over the entire room. The sheer elegance of the setting far exceeded what our budget should have allowed. "How in the world did we afford all of this?" I whispered to Sophie as we peeked into the ballroom before the ceremony began. "Leo just said not to worry about it," she replied with a shrug, something about vendor relationships and calling in a few favors. Before I could ponder that any further, the wedding planner whisked me away to a private waiting room. Through the heavy wooden doors, I could hear the guests arriving, their voices a low, gentle hum of anticipation. Out of sheer curiosity, I asked the planner if I could see the guest list. 237 confirmed attendees, she reported, checking her tablet. "That can't be right," I said, frowning. "We only invited about 100 people." She showed me the tablet screen, and I scrolled through the full list in astonishment. It included names I recognized from the pages of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, CEOs of major corporations, prominent figures in the finance and hospitality industries, and even a few minor celebrities. These were people I had never met in my life, but who apparently knew Leo well enough to attend our wedding. As I was trying to make sense of this, there was a soft knock at the door. My father entered, looking stiff and uncomfortable in his tuxedo, but mercifully sober. "Your mother and I decided we couldn't miss our daughter's wedding, regardless of our reservations," he said stiffly. I stood up and smoothed down my dress. "Thank you for coming. It means a lot to me." "Clara," he began hesitantly, "who are all of these people?" "I just spoke with Robert Montgomery from First National Bank. I've been trying to get a meeting with him for months, and he's here at your wedding, saying the most wonderful things about your fiancé." Before I could even attempt to formulate a response, the wedding planner announced that it was time to begin. My father offered me his arm, and we took our positions for the processional. As the music swelled and the ballroom doors swung open, I caught my first glimpse of Leo waiting for me at the altar. He looked breathtakingly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, and his eyes found mine immediately, filled with a look of pure love and something else I couldn't quite decipher. Relief, perhaps, as if a great weight was about to be lifted from his shoulders. As I walked down the aisle, I noticed my mother and Isabella seated in the front row, both of them looking tense and utterly bewildered by the opulent surroundings and the sea of unfamiliar, high-profile faces. My mother managed a tight, forced smile, but Isabella's expression was thunderous. When I finally reached Leo, he took my hands in his and whispered, "You are absolutely beautiful." Ready to start our life together? The ceremony proceeded perfectly until we got to the exchange of vows. Leo had just finished reciting his heartfelt, beautiful promises when it happened. Isabella suddenly shot up from her seat, her chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. "This entire wedding is a farce," she shouted, her voice echoing in the stunned silence. "You are marrying a waiter, Clara." How utterly pathetic. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My mother buried her face in her hands in mortification, while my father half rose from his seat, looking torn between restraining Isabella and joining her protest. "Do you all have any idea who she's marrying?" Isabella continued, gesturing wildly in our direction. "A server, a man who brings food to tables for a living. The Davenport family deserves better than this embarrassment." I stood there, frozen in humiliation, hot tears threatening to spill down my cheeks. The beautiful, perfect day I had imagined was crumbling into pieces all around me. But then I felt Leo give my hand a gentle, reassuring squeeze. I looked up to see him smiling. It wasn't an embarrassed smile or an angry one. It was an expression of almost amused confidence. He leaned in close to my ear and whispered, "Should we let them in on the secret?" Through my tears, I managed a slight shake of my head. Number. Let her find out with everyone else. Isabella, apparently interpreting our whispered exchange as a sign of distress, seemed satisfied with the damage she had caused. With one final scornful look in my direction, she grabbed her purse and stormed down the aisle and out of the ballroom, the heavy doors slamming shut behind her. An uncomfortable, heavy silence hung in the air until the officiant cleared his throat. "Shall we continue with the ceremony?" I took a deep, shuddering breath and nodded, determined not to let my sister ruin this moment any further. "Yes, please." The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. We exchanged rings, the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and Leo kissed me with such overwhelming tenderness that for a moment I forgot all about Isabella's outburst and the hundreds of confused guests watching us. As we turned to face our audience as a married couple, I noticed something strange. Instead of looks of pity or embarrassment, many of the guests were watching us with warm, knowing smiles, as if they were all in on a secret that I had yet to discover. My parents remained in their seats, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, and my father's expression was completely unreadable. We proceeded back down the aisle together, husband and wife at last, stepping into a new chapter that neither my family nor I could have ever possibly anticipated. The truth about Leo was about to be revealed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The wedding reception was scheduled to begin after a brief cocktail hour, giving guests time to mingle while Leo and I took photos. As we posed for the photographer in the hotel's lush private garden, I couldn't shake the memory of Isabella's cruel outburst. "Are you okay?" Leo asked, gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear. "I'm so sorry about my sister," I said, fighting back a fresh wave of tears. "She had no right to embarrass you like that in front of everyone." He smiled, a knowing, almost mischievous gleam in his eyes. "Don't you worry about Isabella. I have a feeling she's going to be the one feeling embarrassed very soon." Before I could ask him what he meant by that, we were being ushered back inside for our grand entrance into the reception. The ballroom had been transformed yet again. Now it was filled with elegant round tables, each adorned with a towering floral centerpiece. There was a large dance floor in the center of the room and a stage where a live band was playing soft jazz. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm, celebratory glow over the scene, and impeccably dressed waitstaff circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that looked more appropriate for a state dinner than a teacher's wedding. As we entered, the guests rose to their feet, applauding warmly. I scanned the crowd and was surprised to see that Isabella had returned. She was standing at the back of the room, a sullen, defiant expression on her face. My parents were at their assigned table near the front, looking deeply uncomfortable and out of place among the high-profile guests who surrounded them. Throughout dinner, I noticed a steady stream of people approaching our table. They weren't just coming to offer their congratulations. They were there to speak with Leo specifically. CEOs, financial executives, and hospitality magnates greeted him with a level of respect that bordered on deference. They discussed business matters in hushed tones, using industry jargon that I didn't fully understand, before moving on with knowing smiles and nods. My father watched these interactions with a look of growing confusion, while my mother kept nervously adjusting her jewelry, as if she were suddenly concerned it wasn't expensive enough. Isabella simply glared from her table at the back, nursing a glass of champagne. After the main course was cleared, Leo squeezed my hand and stood up, gently tapping his glass with a spoon. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. "First, I want to thank every single one of you for coming today to celebrate our love," he began, smiling down at me. "I want to give a special thanks to Clara's family, who I know had their reservations about me." A low, knowing chuckle rippled through the crowd, only increasing my confusion. "For those of you who know me through business, thank you for keeping my little secret for the past couple of years. For those who don't know me as well, particularly my new family members, I believe some introductions are in order." Leo took a deep breath, and I saw a weight visibly lift from his shoulders. "My name is Marcus Vance, and while I have indeed been working as a server at Celeste, that is not my primary occupation. I am the founder and CEO of Vance Hospitality Group, which owns Celeste, along with 27 other fine dining restaurants and 15 luxury hotels across the country, including the Grandview, where we are all gathered today. Gasps echoed through the room, the loudest of which came from my family's table. I just sat there, frozen in my chair, my mind struggling to process this earth-shattering revelation. I started working in my own restaurants years ago, he continued, starting in the kitchens and moving through every single position. My philosophy has always been that to lead effectively in the hospitality industry, you must understand every aspect of the business from the ground up. I still take shifts at different locations on a regular basis, which is how I had the incredible good fortune of meeting Clara. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and apology. I didn't tell you the truth immediately because, for most of my adult life, people have valued me for my success and my wealth rather than for who I am as a person. But when you treated me with such respect and kindness, believing I was just a server, I knew you were different. I fell in love with your genuine heart, your passion for teaching, and the beautiful way you chose to forge your own path despite all the pressure to conform. He addressed the room again. I kept my identity private because I wanted to be absolutely certain that Clara loved me for myself, not for my assets or my status. And she did. She even defended me to her own family when they looked down on my supposed profession. At this point, I risked a glance over at my family's table. My father's mouth was hanging open in shock. My mother had gone deathly pale and was gripping the edge of the tablecloth as if for support. And Isabella, who had apparently re-entered the ballroom during Leo's speech, was standing frozen in the doorway, her expression a horrified cocktail of disbelief and utter mortification. Leo continued, "And to address the elephant in the room, yes, there was an unfortunate outburst during our ceremony. But I hold no grudges. Judgment based on appearances and job titles is all too common in our society. I only hope that today serves as a small reminder that a person's worth is not determined by their profession or the size of their bank account." He raised his glass. "To my beautiful wife, Clara, who loved the server, not the CEO, I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that pure, unconditional love." Thunderous applause erupted as Leo sat down beside me. I was still trying to process everything, a hurricane of emotions swirling inside me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered, tears forming in my eyes. He took my hands in his. "At first, I was going to, after our third date. But then you told me about how your family judged people by their wealth and status. I wanted to be sure that what we had was real, untainted by my position. The longer I waited, the harder it became to find the right moment. I hope you can forgive me." Before I could respond, my parents were approaching our table, their expressions a cringeworthy mixture of shock and embarrassment. "Leo, we had no idea," my father stammered, extending his hand. "Please accept our most sincere apologies for how we treated you." My mother nodded vigorously. "We would love to have you both over for a proper dinner soon to start fresh. Perhaps we could even discuss some business opportunities as well." I cringed at their transparent, desperate attempt to salvage both their dignity and their potential business connections. Leo shook my father's hand, but his response was cool and measured. "Thank you for the apology. But I want to be perfectly clear. I am not interested in any relationships, business or personal, that are based on my financial status rather than on genuine respect. That includes my relationship with my new in-laws." They retreated, thoroughly chastened, just as Isabella approached our table. Her face was flushed with shame, her earlier confidence completely gone. "Leo, I didn't know," she began, her voice uncharacteristically small and weak. "What I said at the ceremony was unforgivable. But if you could somehow—" "It was very revealing," Leo interrupted calmly. Not about me, but about you, Isabella. You showed everyone in this room exactly who you are and what you value. I suggest you take this as an opportunity for some deep reflection." She turned to me, desperation flashing in her eyes. "Clara, you have to understand. I was just looking out for you. I thought he was taking advantage of you." I just shook my head. "No, Isabella. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting your own ego and our family's image. You tried to humiliate the man I love on our wedding day. That says everything I need to know about your character." As she slunk away defeated, Leo and I rose for our first dance. As we swayed to the music, surrounded by the twinkling lights and the warmth of genuine well-wishers, I finally felt the immense weight of my family's expectations lift from my shoulders for the first time in my life. "Are you disappointed?" Leo whispered against my hair. "That your husband isn't just a humble server after all?" I pulled back to look him in the eyes. "The only thing I'm disappointed about is that you ever felt you had to hide who you are from me. I fell in love with your kindness, your intelligence, and your integrity. Those things haven't changed. The size of your bank account is just details." He smiled, pulling me closer. "That is exactly why I fell in love with you, Clara Vance." As we danced, I caught sight of Isabella standing alone at the edge of the room, watching us with an unreadable expression on her face. And for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely no need for her approval or her understanding. I had found my own path to happiness, one that had led me to a love more genuine and real than anything my family's shallow world of status and appearances could have ever offered. Life after our wedding took on an almost dreamlike quality. Leo and I moved into a stunning penthouse apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, with floor-to-ceiling windows that captured the sunrise over the water each morning. The space was undeniably elegant, but Leo made sure it felt like a home, with custom-built bookshelves lining the walls and cozy reading nooks that made the grand apartment feel warm and inviting. Despite my husband's considerable wealth, I insisted on continuing my teaching career. My fifth graders at Woodward Elementary didn't care that Mrs. Vance was married to a hotel magnate. To them, I was still the teacher who got overly excited about science experiments and who stayed after school to help them with their reading difficulties. This sense of normalcy was my anchor, keeping me grounded as I adjusted to my new reality. "You know you don't have to work," Leo said one evening as I was grading papers at our dining table. "Not that I want you to quit. I love that you're so passionate about what you do." "I need to work," I explained. "Not for the money, obviously, but because teaching is a part of who I am. I think I'd feel lost without it." He nodded in complete understanding, and I fell in love with him all over again for that simple, unwavering acceptance. My relationship with my family underwent a slow and at times painful transformation in the months that followed our wedding. My parents, predictably, became almost desperate to rebuild a connection now that they knew Leo's true identity. Their initial attempts were clumsy and transparent, filled with invitations to exclusive country club events and not-so-subtle mentions of potential business opportunities. "We always knew Clara had excellent judgment," my mother would tell her friends at charity galas, conveniently forgetting her previous horror at my relationship. "Leo is such a wonderful addition to our family." I maintained a polite but firm distance with them, accepting the occasional dinner invitation, but always setting clear boundaries. Leo was remarkably gracious through it all, never once mentioning their previous treatment of him, though he gently but consistently declined my father's persistent attempts to discuss business ventures. Isabella was a different story altogether. The profound public humiliation she had suffered at our wedding had shaken her to her core. For weeks, she avoided all family gatherings and declined my attempts to reach out. When she finally agreed to meet me for coffee 3 months after the wedding, I barely recognized the subdued woman who slid into the chair across from me. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, stirring her latte without meeting my eyes. "What I did was unforgivable." "Why did you do it, Isabella?" I asked, genuinely wanting to understand. Was embarrassing me really worth it? She was quiet for a long moment. I was jealous, she finally admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Not of Leo, obviously, since I thought he was just a server. I was jealous of your happiness. I was jealous of how you found contentment without following the path our parents laid out for us. You could have made your own choices too, I pointed out gently. I know that now. But I have spent my entire life measuring my own success by our parents' standards: prestige, wealth, status. When you rejected all of those values and still managed to find genuine happiness, it made me question everything I had been working for. She finally looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes, and it was easier to try and tear you down than it was to face those questions myself. That coffee meeting was the first of many difficult but necessary conversations, as Isabella slowly began to work on rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't easy. Trust, once so thoroughly broken, does not mend overnight. But I saw genuine changes in my sister as she reevaluated her priorities and began making choices based on her own happiness rather than on our parents' expectations. 6 months after our wedding, she left her high-pressure corporate job to pursue a long-ignored passion for interior design. A year later, she started dating a kindergarten teacher she met through me, a kind, wonderful man whose bank account would never impress our father, but whose character made Isabella genuinely happy. As for me, my own healing came gradually. The pain of my family's rejection had cut deep, leaving behind scars that would always be a part of my story. But with Leo's unwavering support and love, I learned to look at those scars not as reminders of hurt, but as evidence of my own strength and growth. "You know what I admire most about you?" Leo said one evening as we walked along the beach near our weekend home. "Your capacity for forgiveness. Without ever compromising your values, you've given your family a chance to change without ever letting them pull you back into their world." He was right. I had found a delicate balance, maintaining my relationships with my family while staying fiercely true to myself. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and that mattered more to me than any hollow facade of family harmony. Leo and I used our position and our resources to create opportunities for others. We established a foundation that provided scholarships for aspiring teachers and funded arts and music programs in underserved schools. And Leo continued his practice of working occasional shifts in his hotels and restaurants, still believing that true leadership required understanding every single aspect of the business. The greatest lesson I learned through my entire journey was that true value has absolutely nothing to do with job titles, bank accounts, or social status. It lies in integrity, in kindness, and in the courage to live an authentic life, even when others judge or criticize you for it. Leo had demonstrated this by working as a server despite his immense wealth, finding genuine joy in the work itself rather than in the prestige it might or might not carry. My sister had learned it the hard way, through public humiliation and private soul-searching, and I had discovered it by following my heart, even when my own family tried to convince me it was leading me astray. Life is not about the impressions we make or the appearances we maintain. It is about the connections we build, the lives we touch, and the love we share. Sometimes, the most valuable treasures come in the most unexpected packages, and those who judge by outward appearances will always miss out on the true richness that life has to offer. Have you ever misjudged someone based on their job or appearance, only to discover there was so much more beneath the surface? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that true worth goes far deeper than titles or status. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the greatest surprises come when we open our hearts to seeing people for who they truly are, not just for what they do for a living. End of story.